is Bernard Lanskey, formerly Dean of the Yongzhou Conservatorium in Singapore from 2007 to 2021, and President of the Southeast Asian Directors of Music from 2012 to 2021. Bernard is currently leading the Queensland Conservatorium in Australia, and his time in Southeast Asia transformed his awareness of the potential, power, and reach of music, augmented and inspired also by interactions during the period in both Europe as member of the Council of the European Association of Conservatoires and Australia, particularly since 2021. His current focus in seeking ways to integrate multicultural perspectives of music so that all our ears and hearts might be more open, and aware as we create, share, and celebrate the role of art both in community and society at large, and with each other where music matters to us all. Over to you, Bernard.
Thank you, Shahanam. Wonderful to see everyone here today, and thank you for a really intriguing and exciting and illuminating day. Wonderful particularly to have Jacques just then mentioning Peter Renshaw, somebody who was a significant influence in my life 20, 25 years ago, and having him still being acknowledged a generation later is touching. I'm also very conscious I'm the age that Peter Renshaw was when he was of influence of me back 20 years ago. But this today is really very much a homage and acknowledgement to women in Southeast Asia across the last 10 to 15 years. And it's important to me to be able to share this here because the 10th anniversary of this symposium is a special anniversary in my own learning journey, and I want to acknowledge Anatai on the way through this because every year has involved a questioning of self, which means one brings something here which is still on the edge of definition. Today, however, I don't think it's on the edge of definition because it is a genuine acknowledge, but the full appreciation of this has probably only happened in the last couple of years. I'll be looking at 5 areas where I have felt the influence of women in Southeast Asia has been, and not only Southeast Asian women, but women who have been connected to while I was in Southeast Asia. So women who lead by enabling, women who've been influential in the politics of change, who've transformed aspects of research and entrepreneurship, who've brought fresh visions and voices. And then I want to spend some time looking at some conclusions as an older white male, giving homage to the group. In total, I'll be talking about around 24 women. The framing of this is a little bit like, I don't know if anybody has seen a book called The Intimate History of Humanity by Theodore Zeldin, where he interviews a series of women in France and uses that as an opportunity for unpacking more general explorations. It's a beautiful book, and to some extent there's a little bit of this. So these are particular women, but they have, I think, certainly for me, as a learner across this period, brought a lot of enlightenment. So if we go back to that student-centered learning, then I feel I've been the student at the center of this learning. Beginning with, of course, Princess Kalyani Watana. When I first came to here, or I first knew of this potential project, there was this concept of music of life and land. And actually at that time it was music of practice room and concert hall. So life and land seemed a very far way removed. But we are literally at this moment sitting or walking on air compared to where we might have been just 15 years ago. And the perception of concept that turns into physicality, that turns into learning, that turns into transformation is epitomized in the support for the arts that has come through Princess Kalyani's willingness to gift name, but also to gift vision and possibility. The second person I wanted to mention here is somebody called Lily Kong. When I first came to Singapore, we had 3 weeks to do something that was frankly impossible. We had to She was the provost, or she might be vice provost, actually, vice provost of National University of Singapore. She knew nothing about music. I knew something about music, but nothing about Singapore. So the two of us had to try and find a way in 3 weeks to resurrect a curriculum that had gone through a rapid transformation, which was not seen to be fully founded. And we had to bring something in for curriculum by the beginning of that academic year. It had been it was a young institution in transition, and the speed with which she was able to enable me to see ways of working forward from a perspective where she didn't have expertise, but she had ways of play, was astounding. And it was my first opportunity to be working in a university environment. Obviously, I was at Guildhall before, and Guildhall's a standalone institution. Suddenly you were working with somebody who had a much wider definition of direction. Now, I raised this partly because I've been in awe of her ever since, and she's now the president of the Singapore Management University. And I think that probably means she's the first female president in Singapore's university history. And she brings it with a deep engagement in community. So she's a geographer, and a lot of her work has been just looking at how people interact with each other, pretty much on the streets and in through their domestic lives and so on. So that idea of starting from the ground and finding ways to connect has been a really helpful way of reconceiving, taking forward some of those points we were sharing before about putting music in community, or bringing music of community through community, of life and land. In about 10 years ago, actually, I was asked to be on a panel for women empowerment run by the HSBC. And I looked a bit different from the other people on the panel because it was basically National Women's Day, so everybody else on the panel was not male. One of the people on the panel was Jo Malone, of Jo Malone as in the perfumery. And she'd obviously set up a company from ground up, but where all of her principles, were from a perspective of what it was to be a mother with intergenerational connections powering a company. And as she shared what she was doing in her work, you got a real sense that had companies been run by mothers, and I'd say what mothers rather than women in this context, more specifically mothers, the whole environments in which the learning might, the industrial developments might have happened could have been quite different. So it was a real realization that there could have been so many different models if we're just open to exploring, and that began some of this journey. Many of you will see the three. This is all about leading through enabling, this first section, and you can probably read some of the smaller points there that are, that what I've seen through the process of those three women, and the three underneath, which some of you will recognize as in Ramona, Shahanam, and Jenny, working through Southeast Asia, enabling change particularly at the administrative level. So in other words, what is happening to get things done? And these 6 points between those 6 women, generally more collaborative ways of working, building teams, evolving agency, positively open to change. They wanted to see change in their communities because obviously they were victims of earlier prejudices that they were seeking to transform. They would therefore see differences in opportunity. They would be looking for the people who weren't necessarily the top flyers or whatever. They were beyond the immediate solutions, looking more into strategy. And the final one, just recognizing, and this is a really important one, recognizing the importance of getting it done. We spend a lot of time sitting in meetings. The meetings never get anything done. It was the people who would take things out of the meeting and make sure something got done in consequence. And those, certainly the people I knew in person, which is 5 of those 6, certainly have track records of getting things done. And it's extremely interesting to have Shahanam here as, it's Deputy Vice Chancellor, no, Assistant Vice Chancellor. So having grown through into offices that are far more senior than they were 10 to 15 years ago, through these capacities being acknowledged in the Southeast Asian context. So just to acknowledge those 6. three people here who some may recognise, some may not. Deborah Callagher is now president of the European Association of Conservatoires. Kit Young on the right is a music activist, I suppose, in the Southeast Asian environment, originally American, but very active in Myanmar, and obviously Aung San Suu Kyi. And all three have really been looking at issues to do with power relations in community. I don't know if anyone was involved in the dialogue last night, which Deborah was leading, which is power relations in higher music education, which was a 3-hour symposium at the end of a distributed democracy process. It's been going on for a few years, which really looks at issues and abuses, potentially, of power in the conservatoire community. This is it's been Deborah's drive to get this topic really at the forefront of the community, the conservatoire community. It's a long way still to go, but just the fact that the voices are being heard there. The Kit Young, there's a presentation through CEDAM from a few years ago that just looked at the fact it's sort of the colonization of music, really, the fact that there's so many musics in the world that the world doesn't know about. They're sort of seen as lesser musics in a way, and she gave very specific examples of that, and how we could get music to be sourced more from community and rather from excellence. So just as something for those who might not have been at that CEDAM, but she's now working through Washington with the what's it called? The Institute. The Institute helps that, actually. Sorry, it's gone. But sorry, come back. But it's she's basically working in sustainability through culture into the broader society. And obviously, Aung San Suu Kyi, in the context of accessibility and sustainability, was privileged to meet with and converse with her a few times when Myanmar looked like it was on a rapid transformation. She literally doubled the education budget the first year she was there. That's how little they were spending on education. It was possible to double the budget. And then to see what happens when that isn't sustained. Having literally been in a room with the generals where she was the only woman in the room. And I've been often in Southeast Asia in spaces where one woman was the only woman in the room. How do we get some of these balances of perspectives to be rather radically different? I've also been, when I first arrived, in spaces where there were no women in the room. So it's actually something to be seeing transform. Just in the entrepreneurship space, a series of people here, and areas in which they've worked, but I think the most important thing I wanted to point here is that people who've been trying to inspire change often find themselves in some of these environments over the last 10 years, either in conflict or outside existing systems. They've needed to be able to work things to happen, and in some cases the reactions have been less positive about their work, and in some cases they've literally had to leave their institutions. In some cases, they've been very well supported. So it's nice to be able to start with Kat Agras, who's obviously come into music from high-end computing and psychology and so on, but who's also a cellist and has been seeing music as a way to enable that musical activism could actually help transform societies, and is now running this Institute for Music and Health in Singapore. The sort of work that people like Isabel Peck was doing, for example, in setting up cultural exchanges, we know through CEDAM sometimes her tenacity to make sure we did something. And Shahanam and I were with her, for example, in Jakarta, getting ASEAN recognition for CEDAM purely because Isabel was on that case. And so just to acknowledge, again, having fought often with existing structures, particularly in the Malaysian context, to try and get things done, she's sometimes obviously had reactions from more conservative members that she's had to be able to stay resilient in relation to. So that issue of resilience in face of some of that. A really interesting one that I wanted to share is Aaron Ephraim and the Bandung Philharmonic. In terms of orchestras, orchestras are probably often pretty conservative structures. And what she's managed to do with that orchestra in terms of commissioning new works, in terms of getting new instruments into orchestras and so on, really the driving force behind it. I mean, the people who get the artistic direction appointments, acknowledgements in that orchestra are some American men, but from my perspective, it's actually people like Ephraim who've been able to make the changes happen through time. Oops, push the right button and it helps. Then it's Kazumi Minaguchi, who was working with Suntory Hall and is now leading global music at Tokyo University of the Arts. Now, the idea that Tokyo University of the Arts now has a global sector is really partly through her drive and ambition, because the university traditionally was a fairly conservative organization, but her concepts of social justice that come through that have been really beginning to make significant change there. And then finally, is actually Citra Adriani, who in Yogyakarta and Java has been looking into some aspects of researching into women who have been victims of society in really quite horrific ways, and effectively bringing out into broader visibility the nature of some of the abuse that has been involved, first in their manipulation virtually through slavery into the Middle East, and then subsequently when they came back to being to suffer a secondary sort of round of a misrepresentation and alienation. So, and again, sometimes in the context in which she's been working, that has meant that she too gets reactions which are not always positive about her work. So just the bravery and the leadership of some of these people, I think, are opportunities. I had actually hoped we'd have some more students here, perhaps, because this was partly to acknowledge, it's just that time of day, I guess, but normally there's lots of students in these sessions, but partly to give beacons of hope, of opportunity for those coming through in a next generation. And a lot of this work has been intergenerational. Finally, a set of different people, beginning with the pianist Yu Jia Wang. Does anyone know any other female Asian pianists by name of global significance? Yu Jia Wang gets a lot of flack because she chooses to make every performance a celebration, and it's a celebration of energy, of life, of costume, if you like, of fashion. She's an extraordinary pianist, and I think she brings in this world of the woman a new generation of thinking about presentation and so on. So I did want to begin by recognizing the repositioning that's coming through some of the music making just by the sheer brilliance of what she does, and her belief that it's absolutely right to celebrate your identity authentically. The next five are all of a younger generation. I think they're all, no, Huiling's now over 30, but the other four are under 30. And it's just people of that generation who, for me, have actually brought fundamentally different ways of thinking about music. And its interactions in society in some cases, in relation to history in other cases, in relation to openness, to genre, and so on. Doing it, two of them obviously in YST, in the list I think you were sharing before, Chi Kong. But just reimagining what excellent music makers might do in contemporary society today. Seeing them finding their voices over time has been a privilege. And then some of Callista, obviously, just in what she was doing last year with the music, because she was officially Music and Society, isn't she? Yeah, but she's Music and Society. So it takes your point, given the production that she put on last year. It's quite extraordinary. So somebody who takes the art of war, brings in new compositions, generated a sold-out audience in the major central venue as a third-year student. Basically, it involved dance, it involved, as I say, fashion, all sorts of intersectionalities of activity that was going on through that process. And then Nikki Juanita, who I think is probably the first person who decided to go and study Philippine music in Korea. But if we want to think about ways in a contemporary globalized society about how we might interrogate our own ways of working, to go with your music to somewhere, to study your music through the lens of someone else when you're just an undergraduate student. Full kudos to SNU for giving her that opportunity. But as she said, the basis of some things when you get collisions in societal interactions is because you are walking in often in as a minority to a wolf pack. So the idea of how does the wolf pack work is an interesting metaphor, I think, for people coming into whatever musical environments we're coming. There's a whole pile of words up there about these people, but I think what becomes through all of this trending that I've seen in the last decade in these communities here, and I wanted to acknowledge Hui Ling and Anna Tai actually for taking the 30 Under 30 project forward, is to see these concepts of fusions that are beginning to come across genres, timeframes, generations, cultures, that fashions, food, fantasy, and storytelling become as much a part of the creative process as the notes that are on the no longer present page. That curation, production, community, ecology, inclusion, collaboration, and playfulness are part of the interdisciplinarity, and therefore it becomes fun to make art. And they're making art that we can't predict. A lot of it is about a celebration of identity, literally being able to play multiple roles, being to make themselves up and to have multiple identities inside their artistic expressivity. Finally, I wanted to talk about emergences. So 10 years ago when we were, 15 years ago when we were first starting CEDAM, it was a very male enterprise. It was a very specific generational enterprise. 10 years ago when we were first talking about being here, it was very much about the materials that would be studied in the courses and so on. But Anatai and through the philosophies of Princess Galiani, we're already looking at how do we make connections into society, into communities that are very far from here and so on. But we were still pretty much in this community working in binary systems. And I wanted to sort of take a moment. I don't know, has anyone come across the artist Nakane? South African, transgender, epitomizes on stage everything from alpha male through to the softest of feminine capacities, has a vocal range that goes from baritone through to soprano. And it just raises a whole series of issues that transcend the binary when talking about accessibility, sustainability, and the woman, that we will get to a point where just as they are epitomizing it in Nakane, there's so many opportunities to celebrate the diversity of what it is to be human, and that if we move forward taking the soft power of these people over time and to be more open to it in future. A final slide. Conclusions seeking openings. When brought into the HSBC Women's Day committee, it was as a member of He for She, which was a movement a decade ago, where until men start recognizing the power of and value and contributions of women, the contributions themselves perhaps risk being under endorsed, valued, or perhaps lose the transformative opportunity that they could otherwise have shared. So this perception of us all looking to endorse those who are not necessarily in leadership, who are those not necessarily on the platform as I'm conscious I am now, but to take the time to actually give homage to what I feel has been in the last decade for me some really fundamental shifts of awareness. And they're not just about, they're in no sense just about gender. They transcend gender. And this concept, one of the ways in which it transcends is through listening and feeling not to the words, but to the sentiments. How do you actually learn by feeling? And how do we get that concept into our curriculum and so on? It's not going to be knowledge, it's going to be empathy, for example. The system, I fear sometimes, is too quick to pick on the experimentalists or the ones on edge. And there's a evolution I see particularly problematic in our field, which is of intersectionality. The concept of intersectionality being that you might not just be one minority, but multiple minorities. So just taking this, and I've had real examples of this, and I'm going to give one more real example of this, the concept of being, in a global context, an Asian woman is not always a straightforward one in terms of being heard and valued for who you might be and what you might bring. And I've had some horrific, quiet stories shared with me of people who I value immensely, who have had abuse as a consequence of this intersectionalities of identities. And of course you can add sexual preference, for example, as another intersectionality that might come into play, and so on. So as we get into these intersectionals, trusting experimentalists who are daring to define their identities in the moment that is now is something that, oops, what happened? It's back, okay, good. And then this, so just as an example, somebody who I really respect, sharing recently that until one gets the accolades from Europe or America in terms of graduate certificates, prizes, and so on, it's very hard to be heard as yourself. As a 27-year-old, I went to the United Kingdom, and just by having no barriers put in front of me, I could express myself without those concerns. And there were people of capacity, for example, Peter Renshaw, who would see there's something that might be nurtured and give support. So if we're looking out to give support to people who are otherwise potentially held back from that because of how they've been perceived. I've had stories of extremely talented Asian women going to Europe to be told that they've obviously gone there to learn how men used to make music in that society. That's deeply abusive. And by people who are able, it's not only confronting, but a source of anger. The days of the passive responses are clearly past. And just that final point, which is, this is actually a screenshot from the video that the PGVIS put forward just recently. But the idea of the monochrome that can come when we only have one way of seeing the world, whether that's one lens of culture or one lens of gender or whatever, versus the color that can come when we're willing to express ourselves on the stage in play, is something that I thought that little image there projects as my 24th woman in this presentation. So just finding the other in ourselves. I think in the last 10 years, that's what I've been most opened by discovering, is just finding not just the identity that might be the front of mind or character, but the ones that are also embedded within each of us, that we are all a continuation, and how we might make ourselves richer by that sense of self-discovery and gifting the power to difference and recognizing the difference in others, and that how we might, as a consequence, transcend, as it says there, the risk of the monochrome. So thank you to all those who have had that influence, some of whom are in the room, and others of whom hopefully know that it has been meaningful to have been in Southeast Asia. There are other reasons why it's been meaningful, but that group of 24, including the last person who is, if you like, the presence of many. And there are others, of course, that I haven't had time to cover. Thank you to all. I pay homage and am grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. It's an honor to have made it into your slides, actually, and a surprise. I open the floor to questions for Bernard. Anyone? No questions? Yes.
Thank you. It's not a question, maybe it's a statement. I am always confused with the association of female and some qualities. Yes, are they really gendered associated? I'm not sure, and I know that you. It's just it's just for the image, and I think it's really kind to have also that kind of thing. We need that, but I'm really trying to. How can we deal with this question of patriarchal model, which we are all embedded, men, women, and let's say all the others, in fact, because women, it's not a category. I don't even know if it's a gender, in fact. Yes. So all that kind of question that. How can we enter in the discussion of the privileged one and the others? How can we give voices to all this diversity? And when I have the chance to work with Deborah and also with all other people who are working on this question specifically, I was really astonished by the game of the privileged. Do you know the walk of the privileged, which is a framework to dive into the question of the privilege. I am a privileged woman regarding other people, and not only women, all other kind of people. And when you are doing this exercise, because it's an exercise, you gather people and you have the walk of privilege, you have a series of questions, and you have to answer to this question regarding your daily life. And the question can be really wild, social question, health questions, all the things that can characterize someone in this society. And for me, it was really fruitful, because I realized that I can become an ally, and giving the voice, as you said, giving support, because I learned to understand maybe the difference of the others because of the question of the privilege. I have some privilege regarding some people, and I know that some people have privilege on me. So all that kind of things, which is really complicated to dive in fact. How can we do? I don't have the answer, just a statement.
And just to take that forward, just for, if those who don't know what's it called, the walk of privilege, the
Yes.
steps of the walk of privilege.
I know it at the walk of the privilege,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't know if it's
So it would be a
correct
simple
English.
question like, are you male, are you female, are you Christian, are you not, are you from a higher socioeconomic group or what? And so you only walk forward if the answer is yes, and before you know it, in a room, you'll find there are some people still way back there, and yet in that moment, in that exercise, probably people are already privileged to be in the room. So it's an incredibly powerful exercise, and it is part of that. And I was very conscious in bringing this that there's so many complexities in it. That was why deliberately bringing Nakane and Yuzha Wang, for example, at the end, who demonstrate a particular extreme in some ways of the matching of, for example, femininity and gender or something. So there is a whole pile of those things there. But I would encourage people to, if you don't know Nakane's work, they're doing some extraordinary but natural things, having had to confront in themselves identities that they didn't think were right. And then they had to transcend that from a South African perspective, South African Christian perspective. how do you deal with the truth of yourself? And I think some of those political comments that are coming through, that positioning, interestingly, having been picked up by people, Madonna and Elton John and so on, as trying to get those messages out there. But thank you, I totally
But thank you for your
support.
presentation.
Okay, we still have time for a question or two.
Or statements also.
Comments, questions? Yes.
Maybe a bit depressing thought, but the last thing you mentioned about transcending the monochrome, is it just me, or does everybody feel that, especially the last 5 years, it seems that this pressure actually on getting people to be monochrome rather than colorful and expressive is exponentially growing. I mean, if you look at the political situation, I get very depressed of realizing how much evil in that sense is going on at this moment, and how can we possibly, you know, like push back. It's not a question, it's just a thought. It's just overwhelms me, and so I think it resonates very much with what you're saying there. I sympathize very much with that. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Cast. Yeah.
Thank you. I share your thoughts on this. So I want to share a little bit of perspective from the other hat I wear, and Bernard knows I do, which is actually being in charge of a residential college. So in the residential college itself, we have a combination of male and female students living in that complex. And one of the things that we start right from the beginning of their orientation is to tell them a little bit about respect. So the respect goes both ways. It's not just only between the students and the teachers, but amongst the students themselves, anyone in the group, regardless of your gender or your preference. You know, there is no such thing as someone who is kind of like being prejudiced against or biased against just because you think differently. And so in the first place, there's respect. And the second thing is that when the teachers are around, or when their advisors or mentors are around, you need to empower the students, be it female or male students or transgender students. I think that's important, because with that kind of belief and confidence that they can go ahead and do things and be respected at the same time, you know, it's an powerful statement to allow the students to express themselves. And hopefully through that process itself, the students themselves will grow to learn and love themselves and be able to stand on their own, and then be able to represent themselves for others also. I think that's important. So that's just my thoughts.
Last question? Last comment? Yes, Anatai, number 25 on the slide.
I actually have one reflections, looking, kind of noting down the qualities that you have put on the screen. And if you take out the pictures, those qualities are actually really good leaders. And in some way, and I'd like to also take this opportunity to acknowledge all the gentlemen and friends who actually made possible that these women can have these opportunities to, not opportunities, but to be able to work together and make changes that happen like this. So acknowledging any genders, any people from within the music, from outside the music, every generations that actually made it happen. And my questions would be, how can we kind of translate those qualities that it will be shared, not only among women, but all leaders, followers, human being.
Thank you, Anatai. I mean, that was really the last point, is that you're absolutely right. It would have been quite easy to extract all the photos, but it was actually wanting to represent in that sense. But the qualities are, of course, available to us all. And it's a little bit how to get those softer elements of leadership alongside the strengths, because taking to his point, that there's real strength in there as well, and I was potentially touching more on the softer elements rather than the bravery, the boldness, these things that are very real in those identities as we shared. And it was obviously in a context of accessibility to sustainability. Woman, I was drawn into one area, but thank you for that representation.
Just one last reflection. Like I was asking the student, who is the student representative here. I mean, I was asking her, like, from this moment in time to herself, possibly in that screen in the coming years, does she see any difficulties or, I mean, are we as an institutions or people in this generation are actually giving enough space, empowering, or what were things that they need to jump from here to there? It's an open question. I wouldn't want to pressure. I tried to ask her, but she was kind of like,
One thing, just in completion, it's ask yourself, but in completion and in support of that, if we remember back to 2006-07, which is admittedly 15 years ago rather than 10 years ago, the concept that this conversation would even be happening is transformation. And in the Singaporean context, for example, where homosexuality is now legal, and for example, when it wasn't at all 15 years ago, that concept of how times move. And a beautiful statement I heard yesterday, which is rules are important, but outcomes are even more important. How do we change rules to get outcomes that are desired? So that's what I'd be suggesting as we move forward, is what are the outcomes we seek and what are the rules we need to change to enable them to be possible. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have come to the end of the session. So again, Bernard, thank you very much for your presentation, and also to all the four presenters this afternoon. Thank you.